Recording consent. Okay, great. Okay, it's all yours, Amy Tess.
Awesome. So my name is Amy Tess. I use she and her pronouns. I'm originally from Grand Rapids, Michigan, so I'm very glad to see Grand Rapids in the house. Currently at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Based in Ann Arbor, have been doing a lot of Southeast Michigan organizing work for the last 2 years as I've been studying there. I've spent a lot of my time in college doing press work, both on the electoral side of things. So I worked for gubernatorial candidate Abdul Sayed. I've done some stuff with, Justice Democrats and congressional candidates and that type of thing. But I've also worked on the organizing side of things. So doing stuff with organized labor, doing stuff with community immigrant advocacy around, higher ed reform, stuff like that. And what I'm super excited about with Mutual Aid Hub is Mutual Aid occupies this really beautiful space that is none of those things. It's not formal electoral politics. It's not formal organizational politics. It is people in their communities coming together to help one another. It's not charity, it's solidarity. And I'm really excited to figure out together what it looks like to get press around these things to raise awareness rather than just self-promote, which I think is a really amazing part of comms and of organizing overall. I've got a slide deck, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. On the whole, since we don't have a ton of people in the house today, feel free to just cut in if you have questions as we're going along, and I'll also be pausing every now and then to just make sure we don't have any questions on certain subjects. The other thing I just wanted to mention quickly is that obviously we're in a very, very different moment than we were a week ago, right? And so as we've been thinking about how to use mutual aid in this crisis of COVID, we're also thinking about what it looks like to now leverage these networks to support those fighting in the movement for Black Lives, fighting against police brutality, and also fighting to either, bail out protesters who have been jailed, to provide food and medical supplies for folks who are out on the front lines facing tear gas, all of that stuff, right? And so today I'm also more than happy to have that discussion about what it looks like to use communications work around these mutual aid organizations to raise money, to raise awareness, and to get coverage for all of these things. It doesn't just have to be, for the traditional mutual aid stuff that you all have been doing thus far. So forgive me, these slides are a little bit of a kind of grouping of a bunch of different things. So I'm going to be skipping some every now and then. But sorry, the first thing I wanted to do is just talk really quickly about how I personally have conceptualized comms in the work that I've done thus far. A lot of people, when they think of communications, especially in political type fields, it's this very intimidating West Wing type vibe. It's this idea that you're, talking with these cutthroat reporters and talking about very sort of distilled, sterilized topics to make sure that you get your story out there to convince people what you want them to think. That's not at all what we want movement comms to look like. And obviously, even if you try it, I don't think you can or should make mutual aid communications work look like that. So what we really want to be doing is taking this moment that we're in, this incredible historical moment that we're in, and putting it in context for folks. So obviously, Barack Obama was a political campaign, and that's not at all what we're trying to do here. But I think it's a really stellar example of what it looks like to effectively communicate the specific moment that America was in at the time and how to convince people that this action, this cause, is a part of this broader narrative of where we need to head in the future. So that's kind of what we all want to be thinking about when we're messaging on mutual aid. And I know that we've all likely been practicing what we want to message on for mutual aid for a while now, but really being disciplined about the type of message that we want to deliver, I've found is going to make your life way, way easier when it comes time to get on the phone with a reporter and actually tell them what it is that you want them to know. So I'm going to go through this message part a little bit quickly so we can spend more time on the actual technical aspect of pitching stories and getting stuff out there. But just really quickly, this is sort of a diagram I threw together to describe how I like to think about distilling a message. You know, on the left, you have a cause. It's complex. How the heck do you describe mutual aid to people? How do you describe all of the difficult needs that your community is facing and the ways you hope to fill it? How do you describe the values of your particular, you know, coalition of mutual aid organizers that might be different from mutual aid organizers 2 towns away? You know, all of this stuff. What I have found to be the most effective way of sort of parsing this out both in your brain and also among the organizers who are going to be communicating things publicly is to break it down into these buckets, these messaging components. Once you do that, and I'll give a quick example in a second, it's a lot easier to take any particular situation and communicate what you're trying to communicate per the relevant bucket. And that's when you can start to deliver it into the necessary things that you want to be getting in the press. So really quickly, you know, I've got this, you know, I'm actually going to skip this for the sake of time. We're going to do this example instead. This is a far simpler example. We've got congressional candidate Dr. Artie Krivik out in New Jersey's 5th district. And we want to know, okay, what is it that we are telling voters when we're calling a reporter, when we are on social media? What are we talking about? There are so many things we could say about this race, about this district, about this person. Well, let's break it down into some buckets, right? Here you'll see we've got about 12 or so. With regards to what we want people to think about the candidate as a person, we're being very disciplined. We're being very clear. This is what we want them to think about her. This is what we want them to know about her, if anything. This is sort of the feelings that we want people to experience when they see an ad from her, when they see a news story or an interview from her. And these are the policies if they need to know anything about what this race is about. And now I know the campaign has added racial justice and, you know, police brutality, accountability on there. But when thinking about what we want to be talking about when we talk about mutual aid, we want to break it down into buckets, right? So some examples that I know from the Huron Valley Mutual Aid group that I've been working with in Ann Arbor, Michigan, is we believe that our community can be resilient when working with one another, right? So this idea that this is about solidarity and not charity, that we are not, you know, taking pity on people who have less than us or something. This is about collectively building resilient communities. That's definitely a bucket. Another bucket is understanding that we are working outside the bounds of the state because at the moment, the municipality of Ann Arbor has failed us, right? That's definitely a bucket that we like to talk about. So, you know, that and many other things are things that our mutual aid group is about. What is your group about? And how can you all get together to really make sure that you're being clear? Because when you're talking to press, when you're getting that message out there, you're going to want to make sure that you're all on the same page. So when it comes to actually getting the message out there, now that you have your message, there's a few different ways to go about it. The first thing, and the far and away the easiest thing, the most effective thing, is you're going to want to make a press list, and you're going to want to start sending out sort of regular blasts, updating the press on what it is that you all are doing, milestones that you've crossed, and so on and so forth. Making a press list sounds, go ahead.
Yeah, I just, do you have any tips on shortcuts on the press list? You may be about to get into this, but rather than everybody starting from scratch, are there, you know, sources of existing press lists?
Yeah. So to be honest with you, I don't know of any. I would imagine that among mutual aid organizers, like for example, if there are Michigan-based organizers that are on this call or are listening to this recording, I'm going to have my contact info on this slide deck and you all will have access to it. Please reach out to me and I will send you a Michigan press list. I'm also certain that in places like New York City, you're going to have folks who already have local press lists that they've started assembling. And we have a pretty fantastic network of mutual aid groups here. But I don't know of public places where for free you can get press lists for your local area. I don't know if you do, Nathan.
I don't, other than, reaching out to an existing org that's been working in your community,
Right.
that many of them have pretty good press lists. And I would offer that it might be a great way for mutual aid organizations in the same geographic area to collaborate. I know groups are always deciding how much to work together, but sharing a Google Sheet with a press list is like a very, very easy way to collaborate and save some time for everybody.
100%. And I think, as we're talking about what solidarity looks like with the Black Lives Matter movement, I think this is a really important place to start as well. So if you all have press lists that you've been assembling over the last few months, share those with your local BLM organizations, and vice versa. If you are doing mutual aid work that you think could aid in these protests, you might want to reach out to these groups and see if they have a press list you can use so that you all can get press out together that talks about the mutual aid work being done to support these protests and raises awareness if you all need funding or resources and etc. The thing is, when you're doing the building out of a press list for local groups, which is what the vast majority of mutual aid groups are going to be, the benefit is that you really don't need that many reporters to start off. So just to back up a little bit, what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a press list is essentially a Google Sheet or an Excel spreadsheet that's got, first and last name of a reporter, the outlet that they work for, and an email address, and if you're lucky, a phone number. And you're going to want to create an entire spreadsheet of as many contacts as possible of reporters for whom information about your organization would be relevant. For the vast majority of the time, it's going to be local reporters. It's going to be the newsrooms of local TV stations, of radio stations, and it's going to be journalists who are focusing specifically on either rapid response type reporting, just getting the beat on whatever is happening, or it'll be journalists who are focusing, let's say, they've been tasked with covering COVID response in your community. They're definitely going to be writing on this kind of thing. To start off, aside from getting these lists from your fellow community organization, which I would totally recommend, it's pretty easy and straightforward to just start going to your local news websites, be it TV, radio, or print, and look up the stories that have been published about COVID. Look up the stories that are being published about the government response, about the community response, about everything under the sun. Find the name on the byline and pull that name almost always, 95% of the time. That reporter's email address is going to be on their profile on the website, and you can add them to your spreadsheet. With TV and with radio, the best way to go is largely to just go to the local TV website and see the contact us page, and there will always be a newsroom email address and a newsroom phone number. For TV and radio, that's largely the way you're going to want to go because they often assign people based on who's available to cover a certain story. The thing to just keep in mind is that, a lot of us, when we see press, we think of the sort of national famous stuff, New York Times, Washington Post, etc. But the vast majority of people are going to be sitting down and watching the 7 o'clock news every night, right? The vast majority of people might be looking at online outlets that are more rooted in their identity. So I know here in Michigan, for example, there have been a ton of community-based organizations in the city of Dearborn, in the city of Grand Rapids, and other places in West Michigan who might have Arab American roots, might have Muslim roots, and are going to talk to the Arab American news about the work that they are doing in their community. If you have outlets like this in your community that are relevant to your community's work, I know in Grand Rapids, especially on the west side of the city, there's going to be a ton of local news outlets about Latino community organizers and the work that's just being done in the Latino community, and radio as well. These are really great ways to go if your goal is to reach folks who are going to either be helping or receiving services from your mutual aid group. So as you're building out this press list, the next thing to do is figure out what the heck you're going to send to the press list. You're going to want to be sending press releases relatively often. to this press list so that the folks who I guarantee you want to be writing on you can start to get information about what you're doing so that you're basically making it very easy for them to write on you. You're going to want to be sending out press releases. I'll come back to this slide in a second, which is essentially just an email, very brief, very to the point, talking about whatever news you want these reporters to know. So this could be announcements of we just raised a certain amount of money. This could be announcements on we are doing a delivery run on this day, you know, and we're hitting this many houses, whatever it is that you want the news to know about, you could put that into a press release. Of course, we have to ask the question, what is news and what is something that a reporter would actually cover versus just stuff that is happening in the community, right? The main thing to really think about is this: number one, is it timely? Did it happen relatively recently, or is it about to happen? And is it relevant? Is it something that the community, especially with local news, is it something that the community would benefit from hearing, would benefit from knowing about? And is it proximate? Does it actually affect people? These two as well are obviously going to be almost inherent because of the COVID crisis and because of the protests that are happening right now. Making sure that you're communicating why this is like the story to be covering is going to be really important. Now, the format of press releases that you want to send out, this is something that I like to use this format. Most press releases look somewhat similar to this with just a few differences. And again, we'll be sending this slide deck out, but you just want to have it be very brief, very to the point. This top subject line is also going to be the actual subject line in the email. You'll send it out as a BCC, and you're almost writing it as if it were like a very abbreviated version of a news report. Contact info right at the top, very brief description of what happened. Sometimes you'll put quotes in there. This one's a little longer because it was such a big deal. You know, we got a Bernie Sanders endorsement on the campaign. And then you're going to finish it with what's called a boilerplate. I would argue that, especially for mutual aid groups right now and other community groups, a boilerplate is one of the most important things you can have on your press release, because if you have reporters who have literally never heard of you before, all they have to do is read the press release and realize a quick summary of what you are. You know, so here you'd have something like Grand Rapids Mutual Aid, you know, Coalition is a group of students and parents and organizers who are committed to helping our community stay afloat. We are based in X and we believe in Y, something very simple like that. So that's something that you can announce, events that have already happened. If you want to announce an event that will happen that you would like a reporter to maybe cover, right? So let's say you're doing some deliveries and you think it would be cool if you got them to, like, you know, write about it or interview about it and put out the story on local TV, if they film some of it, something like that, then you can just give them a heads up that there's an event that's happening, right? Very brief, very to the point. You just want to tell them exactly what's going on, and that's it. Like, even this one is probably the longest advisory you would see. Before I move on to kind of the details of pitching stuff, I just want to pause and if anyone has questions, because I know it's been a lot so far.
In terms of the press release, we have somebody joining us. Welcome, Dave. In terms of the press release, this is a very technical question. Does it make a big difference in terms of a reporter accessing it if it's like an attachment versus inline in an email, or is there any kind of best practice there?
That's a great question. Always inline in an email. The thing to keep in mind about reporters, which I'll get to in a second, is that they are constantly overworked, especially right now with many people on furlough. The workload is being stretched very thin. Oftentimes, reporters are getting God knows how many of these in their inbox every day, especially TV and radio newsrooms where it's indiscriminate about the reporters, just the entire newsroom is getting these emails. And a lot of times they're checking these on their cell phone. So always put it in the body of the email and keep it as brief as possible so that it can just be very quickly scanned and understood. Good question. So yeah, that's a great segue into who exactly is it that we are pitching to. The thing to keep in mind is it often seems intimidating at first to call up a newsroom for a TV station or call your favorite journalist at the Detroit Free Press or whatever it may be. But the thing to keep in mind is that ultimately, the work that you all are doing is the story right now. Obviously, there's so much that's been happening over the last few days, but I believe deeply that the mutual aid work that's happening in all of these communities is integrally tied to the movement work happening against police brutality. And so keeping that in mind and keeping in mind the sort of feel-good nature of mutual aid in the midst of all this darkness, if you manage to pitch your story well and tell a reporter what's happening, I have very little doubt that a local reporter would want to cover it. But the key is just keeping in mind that it has to be a story they would want to cover. And that's where you have to remember that reporters are people too. So this is just a very brief sort of language when you're talking to reporters. I'm not going to go through all of this right now, but this will be in the slides. Most important thing to remember is just always assume that you could be quoted at any time unless you ask and they agree otherwise. So you're talking to this reporter. You have to convince them that it's news. They are very likely, especially local reporters, going to be a member of your community. They will have seen, the protests happening. They'll feel the fear that you feel about COVID. You want to let them know, why is this news? Based on what I've seen that you've written on in the past, I think you would be interested in this. This is really important for members of my community to know, especially folks on the southwest side of the city. And I think that, this is 100% a story that ought to be covered. One of the biggest keys I've found is when you're not reporting or when you're not sort of calling a newsroom or a general place and you're actually pitching to a reporter, try and get an understanding of what it is that the reporter is covering. So I'll just give a quick example. I have been working on this issue at the University of Michigan for a long time to try and increase funding to the university's satellite campuses in Flint and Dearborn, Michigan. It's a very nuanced, wonky issue that virtually nobody cares about, and it was really, really hard to get stuff in the press for it. But there was a higher education reporter at the Detroit News, which is one of the state's largest papers, who I was digging through her stuff, which really takes like 10 minutes. You just kind of click on the profile of the reporter. And I found that she had written a piece on, the president of one of those satellite campuses. He was a new president and he was very ambitious, and she had just interviewed him. And so I emailed her and I was like, hi, this is a really good piece. I just wanted to let you know that all of this guy's goals for the campus are not possible because the campus is losing a ton of money. I have more detail on this if you would like to report on it. And obviously she was very interested. She came to an event of ours, wrote a massive piece about it, and it ended up putting a ton of pressure on the administration. So keeping that in mind, looking at local reporters who are writing on sort of the arc of what is happening around COVID in the community, how people are organizing and supporting one another outside of the bounds of formal organizations, and all of that type of stuff. And there's a ton of stories about that in the vast majority of statewide and local news that I have seen. And just let them know, hey, I saw your story. I think you would be really interested in what our group is doing right now. The last thing I'll say is just that ultimately, unlike a political campaign that you would see or this kind of stuff you see in West Wing, the reason you all are interested in getting communications work to go well is because you want press coverage so that more people in your community know about the work you're doing, and more people either join the work or request assistance from the work, and you all are ultimately more successful in being embedded and helpful to your community. Comms is, in my opinion, when used well, one of the most powerful tools for this. It's there's a comparison that I love to use, even though literally no one has heard of it, but it's pretty easily understood when I explain. There's like this documentary of this dude who started off with a red paper clip, and he was determined to like trade it and trade it and trade it until he could get a house. And so it was like over the course of multiple years, this man takes this red paper clip, trades it for like a pen, trades the pen for like a book. He just keeps going, eventually gets some used car and trades the used car for a fixer-upper house. It's a beautiful tale. And I see press very much in the same light. You can start off with a very you know, local piece, especially if you're at a college campus or near a college campus, getting a campus newspaper to write on what you're doing, getting, you know, in a hyper local sort of community activism paper, whatever it may be. And you take that writing and you sort of, you know, send that link to a reporter maybe at a statewide newspaper and say, hey, here's some more background on the work that we're doing. Let me know if you're interested in writing. And this can start to work really in interesting ways. Just an example from Abdullah Sayed's gubernatorial campaign here in Michigan. You know, I'm helping with press for this 32-year-old brown Muslim dude trying to run for governor in a state that went for Trump, right? And so one of the first pieces we ever had written was this one. Not an ideal headline. But you start to kind of trade it up. You start to talk to other statewide reporters. You start to craft a message around what your campaign's about. People see that, they follow you on social media, they start volunteering for you. And ultimately you raise money, you do well. And this was a week before election day. That 92 days is before the general election. And we had, you know, this rally with Bernie Sanders and Abdullah on MSNBC, you know? So ultimately what comms is about is leveraging public sort of platforms to build movements, to get people in, and to tell the story that you want to tell to the world. And I'm confident that with the amazing work that you all are doing and just this moment that we are in this country, I have no doubt that the stories you all want to tell are the ones that this country needs to hear. So I'm happy to take questions, to go back to any parts that were confusing, or to talk a little bit more about working through some of the specific things that you all have been struggling with. I know that was a lot. I was just trying to fit a lot in a short amount of time.
Lacey or Dave, you have any questions? I'm happy to keep throwing them out, but I don't want to hog the mic. And if either of you are not in a place that you can unmute, feel free to add questions in the chat bar as well. Okay, well, I'll ask a question. So if I have say a local TV station is interested in covering my mutual aid group, obviously this is a unique and challenging time for them to come, you know, film things, tape things, whatever you want to call it. Is it helpful for me to have video ahead of time, or is it helpful for me to just have ideas for things they can come put their camera in front of?
Thank you for asking that again. I meant to include that after you asked it last time. Yes. So oftentimes, don't be afraid to sort of engage with anyone who's asking to cover you what might be the most helpful way for them to get footage or whatever. But 99% of the time, especially in this moment, I guarantee you that if you had video, what a lot of people call B-roll, which is just sort of like silent rolling footage of maybe people delivering stuff to doors or whatever it is that your group does, you know, putting together care packages. If you had rolling video of that, think like political campaign ad where there's like the voiceover and it's just that silent video. That's the kind of video that local TV is going to be looking for. If you're able to send that to the folks interested in covering you, they almost certainly will be willing to use that. Also, though, maybe in this moment, folks are a little bit more willing to go outside than they were like a week ago. So it's kind of hard to say.
Well, you know, an interesting thing, this is Dave. Sorry I'm late. I was late, so I may have missed some of this, but
no worries at all.
Go ahead. The world of sourcing. So, you know, it's obviously to do PR properly and marketing communication properly, you've got to get out there and you've got to figure out who the hell to talk to. It's an awfully steep task, you know, when you're trying to do your, you know, run a business, do your job, as well as kind of do these. Ultimately, what these mutual aid things are, you know, very volunteer-oriented role, right? So how would you prospect? I mean, how would you prospect for the reporters and the interested people that you could pitch the stories to? Because you know, that's 90% of the battle is identify them. And if you're going to belong to a Cision or you belong to some of these platforms, it costs you your firstborn. So, you know, you're trying to figure out how to do that without, you know, spending the farm and And I just don't know, without doing it every day and looking at a halo, and it's just, I don't know how you do it.
No, that's a fantastic question. And I agree. If you can find those people, that's like the biggest hump to get over. I would say that there's three main things. One thing that we talked about briefly at the very beginning of the call is that very often there's going to be organizations in your community who have already been doing really critical community organizing before COVID happened. And I'm sure many of them are sympathetic to the work that mutual aid is doing. So I would recommend reaching out to organizations that you think would be sympathetic and just asking if they have a press list already made of a lot of the local reporters who tend to report on community organizing that is happening. That's the first thing. Second option is, a really quick and easy way to get some of the sort of top reporters that are likely to report on your issue. And that's just simply going to your favorite local or statewide press websites and seeing who's already been writing on just anything related to COVID-19, anything related to community organizing. You just click on those articles, you click on the author of those articles, and you grab their email and add it to the list. You could do a sweep of all of the top news orgs within 25, 30 minutes, right? And then the last thing I'll say is that if you are active on Twitter, oftentimes reporters in your community will always be on Twitter, always talking about what's happening. And it's pretty easy to do a quick, keyword search of folks in your community and try and find reporters that way who care a lot about the issues that you're working on.
So and then prepping for the story when you're pushing it out there, how much do you prep them for that story? Do you give them sound bites and hope that they contact you, or do you make it so it's so well formed that it's like they can make a deadline and they're done? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Let me share my screen again really quick. The quickest and easiest way to kind of pitch the story to them without doing too much work on the front end before you even know if they want to cover it is what's called a press release. It's essentially, you've got what theoretically like a headline would be, and then you've just got a few sentences sort of giving the main idea of why this matters, what's going on. You've got your contact info at the top, and then a quote or two if you feel that it's necessary or relevant, and then a boilerplate at the bottom that's sort of a quick summary of what your group is all about. So I would start with that and sort of send it out to all the folks via email, BCC'd, that you think would be interested in writing. And then if you have specific individuals that you think are really likely to be interested in what you're doing, I would, bump it to their email individually and drop them a note. And maybe if you have their phone number, leave them a voicemail as well.
Great. A quick question on letters to the editor and or writing an op-ed, which seem like similar but not quite the same. And if you have any thoughts on those as tactics.
Yeah. As far as the differences between the two, an op-ed is almost always going to be authored by someone that the editor will find a voice that the community would benefit from hearing. So either that individual has expertise in a particular thing, they're a doctor or professor or something, or they are, say, an organizer of a mutual aid group that's helping people, or they occupy some kind of identity that is salient in the moment. I think op-eds are a really fantastic tool because it's a way of basically saying exactly what you want to say without having to worry about, how a story will turn out, and just getting to put it somewhere and then amplifying it. What I would recommend doing is, the op-ed has to be something more than just what would seem to be self-promotion. As much as I wish that we could just talk about our mutual aid groups in an op-ed, editors are usually going to want to see some kind of thesis put forward. I think that the most likely way an op-ed could get published that would sort of promote mutual aid work is talking about, something along the lines of either the needs in your community right now, or an op-ed about how, the city of Grand Rapids is coming together in a way that it has never done before. And then you write about mutual aid and the protests or something, some kind of opinion piece that people would really be likely to read. And the best way to usually go about that is to draft it first, anywhere between 400 and 700 words, very sort of to the point on the argument, throw in a couple good stories, and then reach out to the editor of the newspaper and see if they would publish it. Letters to the editor are great too. The only thing is that you don't really have control over whether it gets published. You just kind of submit it, and then you don't hear back, and you just hope that maybe they'll put it out there. Also, it's very there's way less readership of letters to the editors than there would be of an op-ed, but it's definitely worth doing because usually you can just submit like a paragraph. Good question.
Any other questions from the house? Cool. Well, Tess, would you be fine with us sharing your email with folks in case they have a follow-up question about anything?
Yep, for sure. And I'll send you that slide deck as well. Feel free to send that out to the group.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for another terrific presentation on comms. I learn something every time. And thank you, everybody who joined us today. Thank you for the work you're doing. It's incredibly important, and look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you all for doing this work. Seriously, you're inspiring.
Okay,
have a great
take
night.
care, everybody. See you soon.